Just wait till you see.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. I see we got some people from Silicon Valley. I'd love to see where y'all are from. My name is Garrett. If this is your first time joining us, I will be your host today and through this series called Cinematic Storytelling, hosted by Live Panels. So big W to Live Panels for putting this on. If you are unfamiliar with this series, this is the second live stream series that we've done, the third series in total with light panels, this of course being on cinematic storytelling. If you have not yet engaged with any of the other live streams that we have, those are available on Light Panel's YouTube channel. So you can go over there, you can watch those, kind of catch up on some of the things that we're talking about. Don't leave the live stream, stay here. But at some point, go back through, take a look at that, and kind of catch up so that way you can kind of see where we are from. So there it is right there in the chat. And speaking of the chat, as we go through today, as with all of our sessions, if you guys have any comments, questions, concerns, things like that that you want to address, I try to do that as we move through this. So there is both the chat window as well as a Q&A module here within Zoom. If you have a question, I will do my best to answer that as we go along, and then time permitting, we will address all of the questions at the end. Today's series is going to be a little bit more interactive than some of our other series because, of course, we are talking about 16 different setups with 16 different locations, costume changes, all of that. It was a big undertaking for doing it in 2 days. So the way that we're going to do this is that we're going to talk about some of the larger concepts, the fixtures that we used, the strategy that we approached this with, because it was such a large undertaking in such a short period of time. And then I'm going to open it up to you to find out what scenes you want to talk about, which ones you'd like to break down, and we can then discuss, of course, for each different location that you guys want to talk about, how we approached lighting, the reasons why we did what we did, how we positioned them, and all of that. So a little bit more interactive today. But I am really, really excited to dive in. I see we've got somebody here from Virginia. We've got somebody from Silicon Valley. We've got the South End on Sea in the UK. We've got a whole bunch of folks in here. So really, really good to see you. But before we can dive into how we shot this spot, we should probably watch it first. So before we dive in, we're going to take a look at it. And then, of course, we will kind of discuss our approach. So without further ado, I'm going to go here.
Everyone knows online classes at Washtenaw Community College are fantastic. Just wait till you see. The cutting-edge facilities that are only available on campus. This isn't business as usual. Business today is whatever you want it to be. From creating sleek web designs and apps to innovative programming, WCC fuels my passion. I can crack the code to success in IT and networking. And WCC offers more than just bytes and bottom lines, like developing my skills in photography. Or turn your ideas into eye-catching visuals as a graphic designer. Perhaps I'll find my rhythm in audio engineering. The opportunities at WCC are limitless. From safeguarding connected vehicles to creating mind-blowing 3D animations. No matter your dream, we have the tools to bring it to life. Because today's business world is as diverse as our interests. Discover the hands-on education that awaits you in the Business and Computer Technologies division. You have to be here to believe it.
Okay, so that was the spot that we created, 90-second spot for the college. But as you can see, lots of costume changes, lots of different setups, lots of different lighting styles to put that ad together. So to give you an idea kind of the scope of what we were doing, we had 18 scenes, but 2 of them were repeats. So we had 16 setups, 16 locations, 16 wardrobe changes. We had 2 days to do it. We had a crew of 5 people. So very large undertaking, very short period of time. And the way that we approached it, the way that we did that is that we knew we weren't going to have the ability to do very large lighting setups, complicated lighting setups, things that required a lot of different fixtures and rigging to do. So for this, we really only used 2 fixtures, and you can see them kind of here. The first one that I want to talk about is the 1x1 Gemini Hard. Most of the time we kept this in the DOP Choice snap bag. Sometimes we used it for ceiling bounces, sometimes we had diffusion on it, sometimes we didn't have diffusion on it. But the entire time that we were using this light, we were running it off of battery power, specifically this dual bracket, which we'll talk a little bit more later. But that gave us a ton of flexibility and options in how we were able to move this light around, how quickly we were able to set it up, change things out, make it happen. Because we're able to run the light at 100% power, even when we are on battery. Okay, so we did it 2 ways with this. One is this, of course, where we can see the Anton Bauer batteries that are on it. The dual bracket comes in both V mount and gold mount. So depending on the battery system that you're using, you can get brackets for it. Light Panels also makes a single battery bracket instead of a dual like this. But with the 1x1 Hard, because it is such a powerful fixture, you don't get as much runtime, obviously, off of a single as you do with the double. So I would recommend the double on that. But it was really, really easy to do it. We threw the light on a Rolly, which is just a general light stand that's on wheels, and we were able to then move it between locations very quickly, set it up, lock it off, and light however we wanted to. So that was the first one. So every single scene that we are in, we're using this light, and generally we're using this as a key because it is so bright. Even for those outside scenes, the light is bright enough that you're able to use it and supplement it for the outside. The other light that we used is the tube light here. I went through and 3D printed and had a friend sew a diffusion tube basically for this tube light. And what that did is it gives it a little bit more of a 360 wrap on the light. Again, there it is on the Rolly. You can kind of see how it moves. It diffuses the light, it softens it up, and because the surface area of a tube light is so long, it gives a really, really nice, even spread. So this one here is a smaller version because it's the only thing I could fit in my studio. This is the Dual Rainbow by Quasar. This is the 2-foot configuration, but these, what we were using were 4-foot LED tubes, and those were just pieces that I went through and 3D printed. I might at some point make a standalone episode on my YouTube channel of kind of the process that I use to create the modifier. It's pretty cool because it's all 3D printed and whatever, but that's what you're seeing in all this BTS is these lights hidden within that. The nice thing with the Quasars in particular is that they are brick battery capable, because the power component, you can either go into mains or you can go into DTAP. So for that, you can power the lights off of Anton Bauer batteries, whether they're V mount or gold mount, and have the flexibility of interchangeable batteries. So that way you don't have, internal batteries that are going to die throughout the day. So that these 2 lights are the only lights that we actually physically used through the space. The only other modifier that we used was a 5-in-1. And if you're not familiar with a 5-in-1, it's called a 5-in-1 reflector. It's a pop-up, so you can get it in round, you can get it in kind of a rectangle shape. But it is a pop-up that gives you diffusion, it gives you white bounce, it gives you negative fill, which is like a black solid, it gives you a silver reflector and a gold reflector. An extremely affordable light modifier. I think that the one that I have is a 3 foot by 4 foot. I think I got it for less than $20. It was like $15 or something like that for that. But that gives you a ton of options for off light modifying. So if you need to bounce light, if you need to reflect light, gold, silver, if you need a negative fill or a standard diffusion, you have all of those options there. And we used that as well. And if you're starting to build your kit, you're starting to build out your lights. We've talked about this before. We'll talk about it forever, which is buying the brightest, most accurate lights your budget can afford. But in addition to lights, the things that are super, super important when it comes to modifying or adjusting the behavior of light are those modifiers. And the hands down, without question, the most affordable light modifier that you can get to start with is something like a 5-in-1. So highly, highly recommend it. But these two lights on rollies, moving them between sets, generally this is the key and this is the fill. A couple of times, because this light is so bright, we would use this as a ceiling bounce to kind of fill the room a little bit more, and then rely on this as the key inside the diffuser. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is how we went through and we powered all of this stuff. So the powering of it was all done obviously with Anton Bauer batteries. On day one, we powered our 1x1 hard using a VCLX, which you can see there, the big brick battery, which gives us all day life. But everything from the camera to the lights, to the monitors, everything that we used, we were running exclusively on battery power. And what's amazing about that is that the power that you get and the consistency of that power that you get, whether it's the micro batteries, the full size batteries, or of course like something huge like a VCLX, you get a ton of power for the output. And depending of course on how bright you have this light set up will determine how much. But like right now with what it's at now, it's like I've got 8.5 hours still left on them. So depending on how bright you're using it and what you're using it for, you get a ton of power off of those, even off of the small batteries. And being able to run those lights at full power without having a reduced output is super, super huge. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of look at some of the scenes. I'm going to pull out a couple that I want to talk about, and then this is where I'm going to start to lean on you. If you want to talk about particular scenes within this project, we can break those down as we go through. If we can get through all 16, amazing. If we can't, that's no big deal. I will be posting breakdowns of all of this stuff on my Instagram, so you can go follow me over there if you want to. It's just my name. So if you go to Instagram, you type in Garrett Sammons, you should find me, and I will be posting screenshots, behind the scenes stuff, and of course lighting breakdowns of anything that we don't get to in this stream over there. So you can check that out there. But the first one I want to look at here is just kind of this opening scene. And this opening scene, where are we here? Not this one. I want this one. Perfect. The thing with this opening scene is that we are using a negative just as much as we are using our key light. So in this case, we have this giant window behind our subject, which is separating our subject from our background, right? When we had our discussion about 3-point lighting, you don't need 3 fixtures. It's understanding the principles. We want to make sure that we separate our foreground from the background. So having a dark foreground figure with dark hair, dark robe, having a very light background, and in this case, a big window behind, is a great way of creating that sense of separation. Also, because we don't have context in the room here, we just rotated the couch in the room to get the framing that we wanted. It makes absolutely no sense in the physical world having a couch on like a 45-degree angle, but you can see here with the composition of what we have in the room, it looks like a complete room. It doesn't look like it is off axis. So for this one, directly to the camera right of our talent is a big sliding glass door, which is letting in a lot of naturally diffused light from the outside. We talk about motivated light a lot and taking an existing source light or practical light and then adding studio to that. So for this, all we used is we used the dual tube diffuser that I built, and we just used that to push a little bit more soft wrap around him. Now, because we have a large lighted source from one side, we really wanted to lean on that and create a sense of contrast, because whether this is in the morning or the evening, presumably we are creating a look that feels as though the sun would be low in the sky, right? So again, morning or evening. And so with that, heightening that and kind of creating a more contrasted or dynamic look with that is something that's really important. And this goes into the 5-in-1. If you look at the diagram breakdown there at the bottom, you'll see that we had the black solid or the negative fill on the 5-in-1, and we pushed that as close to him as we could while still maintaining the framing that we wanted. But what we do there is, in the same way that a bounce kind of brings the light back or fills that light in, a negative pulls more light away. So if you actually look at the contrast from one side of the face to the other side of the face of our talent, we're really looking at probably close to 3 stops of light from one side to the other, which is a lot, right? That is a fair amount of light to use. Now here we go. Look, I can also be here. So I wanted to kind of show this because to get the looks that we want to get, even when we're talking about using very minimal equipment, very fast turnarounds, right? We don't have a ton of time for lighting and rigging. Pulling light away is just as important as bringing light or adding light in. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to highlight there. Chuck says, if you didn't have your tube light, what would you have used instead? So great question. You absolutely could use a panel light like the 1x1s or 2x1 Gemini lights, but what I would probably recommend doing is using it as an indirect bounce light. So because the larger the surface area of a given fixture, the softer that light is perceived on our subject, we want to make sure that we take a light fixture and expand its surface area as much as we can. So one of the things that you could do is you could take your light, like a super powerful light like this guy, point it away from your talent into a beadboard, into a 5-in-1 set to bounce, and kind of take that light, push it into a much larger surface area, and then use that to bring that light to get that wrap that we're talking about. If we pointed this directly at our subject, it would be really, really hard, hence it, of course, being called a 1x1 hard. So increasing that surface area is the key. The other thing you can do, especially if you're in very, very tight spaces, if you don't have beadboard, if you don't have a 5-in-1 or the room to operate, there's another technique that we would call a corner bounce. A corner bounce is pretty simple. It's where you go into the opposing corner from your talent and you take your fixture and you point it right where the 2 walls meet the ceiling. Right? Generally, this obviously works better with really light or white walls. But when you take that light and you point it into the corner of a room where the 2 walls meet the ceiling, that then is going to take that light and push it all the way around through those walls and ceiling to create a much larger surface area light, which is going to create that sense of very, very large fill. Okay, so if you don't have a tube light, I would go indirect bounce, whether you do that into a card, you do it into a 5-in-1, or you do a corner bounce. Any of those would totally work. But yeah, that's kind of how I would go through and do that there. If you guys, and Chuck's absolutely right, if you guys have questions as we're going through this, just fire them off and I will do my best to kind of get through those and explain those. Okay? All right, so let's look at this next one real quick. This next one, I skipped the outside scene. We're going to get to that one kind of at the end, unless you guys want to bring that more forward. So for this scene, we have a very, very, very large area, right? I mean, we have 9 talent that are on camera, right? We have 8 foreground. We've got 1 kind of in the center. So generally for a much larger room like this, for a much larger setup like this, this would require a lot more lights and a lot more rigging, because again, the idea is we want to light spaces and not faces. If we can create a compelling lighting setup that our talent can move through, like our talent does here, we go from one side of the whiteboard to the other side of the whiteboard, and we don't want to lose them in that or lose their light in that. We need to light the entire space. So the first thing we did for this setup is we used a color meter or a spectrometer, and we took a color read of the house lights, right? House lights are going to be the practicals that are within the environment, generally the top-down lighting, which in this case is what it was. The nice thing with the Gemini lights and the Quasar lights is that you can very, very accurately color match. So the process that we would do is we would go in, the AC would take a color read, kind of where our talent would be. We would then tune the lights to the read of the natural room, and then we would take a follow-up color read now that we've introduced a bunch of new light, and that new read is then what we would set the white balance in the camera to. Okay, matching light is super easy, it's super fine, but like for instance, the tabletop surface of this conference room that we're in is that brown, right? The more light that we add into that space, the more light is going to be reflected off of that table, the more that is going to alter and change our color reads. So when you are doing a color read and we're doing color matching, make sure you do it in a two-step process, right? We read the room, we match to the room, but then we need to read again to match the camera. Because again, all of this is about how light behaves within a space. So with that in mind, we did two things. We took the 1x1 hard and we did a direct ceiling bounce. Ceiling bounce, very similar to a corner bounce. As the name implies, instead of bouncing our light into the corner of a room, we go directly into the ceiling. The reason why you would choose a ceiling bounce versus a corner bounce is the size of the room. The opposing corner in this space was so far away from our talent that if we tried to do a quarter bounce, it wouldn't push into the room as much as we'd want to. So with a ceiling bounce, you can bring the light closer to your subject. You can hit the ceiling with it. Generally, most ceilings are painted neutral white, and that then will give you kind of that soft fall off kind of in the top down. Again, to create a sense of dynamics to our lighting, we then took the tube light on the other side. General kind of tip when working with tube lights, whether they're in a custom diffuse thing or they're just naked like that, always put them on a 45-degree angle, both in terms of your X and your Z axis. So X, of course, being here, or your Y being here, right? So you wouldn't have it straight up and down or straight horizontal unless there was an aesthetic reason to do so. Keeping it on the 45 here allows that light to wrap both in your X and your Y axis. And then, of course, instead of it being perpendicular to your talent, adjusting that to being 45 degrees toward your subject or away from your subject is also going to make sure that that light wraps much more evenly around your talent. So if you have an aesthetic reason to make it more perpendicular or parallel, totally fine. But generally speaking, when we're talking about normal fills, though, that's going to be tilted on a 45 to get a little bit more wrap out of it. Oren says, does Light Panels have an app that can read and match existing colors in case we don't have a Sekonic color meter? I don't know if Light Panels app does read and match. I know that Moment makes an app that has that functionality. And I know that Lumu, which is Lumu, has an app that does that. The spectrometer that I use, or the color meter that I use, is the Lumu Power, which is Lumu Power. I think they have a Power 2 now at this point, which works with an iOS device. It plugs right into the top of the phone. I have tested my Lumu against a Sekonic, and it's within a margin of error that is so negligible. I feel confident using that. The difference, of course, being the Lumu, I believe, is $200 or $300 versus, of course, the spectrometer from Sekonic, which is going to be much more than that. So I do know that Lumu and Moment have that capability in their apps. And then, of course, the Lumu Power is the little piece of hardware that I use, which is fantastic. Highly recommend that. Light Panels team says Light Panels app helps connect the lights together, but doesn't read and match the light. So there you go. The other thing that I would do, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, but Oren, kind of more to your question, whenever I would traditionally do color matching with fixtures, is that I would take a read, I'd set the light, and then I'd read the light to see how close the light actually was to the readout that it had. The light panels are so unbelievably accurate to the readout they're more accurate than any of the other fixtures that I've used, to where I actually don't read the light itself for color. I will read the source environment, and then I will read the lit environment, but I actually don't even feel the need to read the lights to match because of how accurate they are, which is really, really cool. Okay, so ceiling bounce to give us our main environmental fill, and then of course using the tube diffuser to create a sense of more fill in on the shadow side of our talent's face. Okay, everybody tracking so far? If at any point you want me to skip ahead to other scenes and things, we absolutely can do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep kind of ripping through these as we're moving forward, okay? This one, again, very, very similar, but because our depth, our foreground, midground, background really shrinks our space, right? Because we're shooting over 2 different shoulders to our talent with background. We're not living in as much of the room as we were in the conference room. So as such, we were able to kind of bring our lights in more. So if you actually look at the back half of our talent, right, their back, kind of the ear, you'll see that there's this really nice kind of edge light or crown light that's hitting them from behind. That's that dual tube diffuser. It's got a really nice soft roll off, where you can then see on the other side, we had our 1x1 Gemini Hard with the DOP Choice Snapbag, which is giving us that very direct key light. Aaron, did you say that your Quasar tube lights can run off of DTAP? What model? I see that some are only USB-C rechargeable or traditional plug. Yeah, Aaron, so the rainbows. So this guy here is the double rainbow, which is why it's this wide boy here. But the rainbows and the double rainbows both run on an Osseum system, which is kind of a speed rail that's on the back of the fixture, and they have all sorts of mounting hardware and accessories and things like that. But yes, on this, maybe I can rotate it around. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. So yeah, so on this, you'll see I have a DTAP right here that's directly attached to this speed rail system that I've got. And then this plug here plugs into this 4-pin DC, which goes into DTAP right in the top of my micro battery. And it works really, really, really slick. So that's nice because, again, the battery can die and I can replace it and I can just keep a light up throughout the day. So I know for a fact the rainbows all have that. I have a couple of crossfires, which is what, or crossfades, which are what are lighting me over here from Quasar. Those, as far as I know, don't have DTAP capabilities. Those are just mains, but these for sure have the DTAP, which are awesome. Highly recommend the rainbows. The rainbows are also full, as you can tell, RGBWW lights, which makes it super easy. Okay, so these ones are kind of fun. These are kind of our little hacker scenes that we put together here. This clip, obviously very short, just kind of introducing things. So in this server room that we had on the far side, as you can tell, there's this big giant window. We didn't want to see what was on the other side of this window, so we took the 5-in-1, opened it up just so it was the diffuser, and we just gaffed the 5-in-1 over the window, which is a full stop of diffusion that's then covering the window. So light can still come through, but we then don't have to see what's on the other side of that window. From there, just outside that, we put the 1x1 hard. We had it in the snap bag, but we took the diffusion off of that. So it was just using it almost as barn doors, right? Just a way to shape that light. And we then brought that light up close to that 5-in-1. So that way we then had a really bright backlight source, which you can then of course see reflected on the cages there within the server room. Right next to the camera, we then had the dual diffusion tube. This one we did set up vertically, so the tube was perfectly up and down. And the reason for that is A, very tight space we were filming, and B, it was to bring light back into the other side of the server wall. So the reason why we can still see our talent and the reason why we can still see those pillars on either side is because we're filling that light in ever so slightly compared to that kind of reverse key that we have going on there. This shot was shot in a completely different space. It's made to obviously look and feel as though we are in that same lane, but that lane was far too small for us to film in. So we used a 15 millimeter lens to give us kind of that wide angle that we're looking at here. And we just did what we call a 50-50 light, where we put two lights completely perpendicular to our subject, parallel with our camera angle. So on the one side, we had the 1x1 hard in that snap bag with diffusion, and on the other side we had that dual tube diffuser, again on that 45 vertically that we're talking about, but not on the 45 diagonally, because of course we wanted this to have that kind of contrast where we see on camera, right, that fill come in, but then we have kind of that dark band down the middle of our talent's face before we then get into that key side. All of the transitions that you see in this piece are all practical. They were all done in camera. So, you know, we had him kind of grab the laptop, the corner of the laptop webcam, and then like pull it down, which then led into our next scene. If you're gonna do transitions, it's always a good idea to try to do those practically. The way that the pixels behave, the way that the look behaves, the way that the motion blur behaves is always going to be better in camera. If you didn't get it in camera, or the transitions were added later, you can still kind of fake your way through it. But generally speaking, getting them in camera is fantastic. The only time I wouldn't recommend it is that if your camera had a rolling shutter that was pretty bad, and you knew that any whips like that, whether they're vertical or horizontal, any whip pans or tilts are then going to like really distort the image, maybe then do it in post, but still that behavior is not going to be quite the same. We filmed all this on the Red Komodo, so that is a global shutter, so we didn't have to worry about any of the rolling shutter issues, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, this next scene here, we'll skip this one. This next scene here, right in the dark room. We filmed this two ways. The first way that we did it is we set the Gemini and the Quasar to a particular red color using the HSI settings within them. But what we found when we did that was it would blow out the red channel, and it wouldn't give us the amount of contrast that we wanted on our subject's face. So what we ended up doing is we actually ended up shooting it neutral white and then changing it to red in post. If you're gonna go with a monochromatic look, which is this, right, a single color look, easy to do in post. All you need to do is you need to make your footage black and white, and then you just need to create a color overlay over the top of it. Really easy to do, but it allowed us to get the color, it allowed us to get the contrast, it allowed us to adjust our image in a way to get the look that we wanted, to where the final image would look like we're in a dark room, without the complications of kind of blowing out one of your channels in particular, because these lights are so color rich and so color bright. So with that in mind, as you can see here, we flew the diffusion tube up and over that center island. That is what we are going to be using as our key on our subject. And then we did a ceiling / corner bounce with our Gemini 1x1 hard in the background to bring light kind of forward. Without that light in the background, it really fell off to where our subject was lit, but the background fell into nothingness. So we really wanted to make sure that we maintained that contrast and that context within our scene. So this one, post grade, to make it look that way, it was shot neutral white, but we did try it both ways to see which one would work better for this particular scene. That then leads into this, again, a larger scene, so we are leaning on the source lights, practical lights, house lights that we had there, and then color matching to those, and then just simply worrying about lighting our foreground. So everything that you see in the background, all of that's just lit by the house lights. The focus of our lighting is on our main character, and then of course the background that we had just to the camera left of our character. So we set up our 1x1 hard in the snapback with diffusion, almost perpendicular to our subject, a little bit cheated forward because we needed to get past the other background so that way they weren't blocking light. And then we wheeled in the dual diffusion tube on the other side to fill that in. Okay, super simple. All of these scenes probably take somewhere between 10 to 20 minutes per setup. which is extremely fast when we're talking about a sequence that has 44 extras throughout it and everything else. This is where we started to have a lot of fun, okay? So the Quasar tubes are full RGB WW tubes like we talked about before. So for this, we used the 1x1 hard in the snapbag with diffusion as our key light. We really warmed that light up to like a 2,500 degree light. And then in the background, we used the tube, which if you look at the computer screen, the one that's off there on camera left, you can actually see the tube in the reflection, right? That's very intentional to give kind of a visual dynamic to an otherwise completely black screen. But you can see that we had the tubes set up to be purple, right? So HSI for that, just to give us kind of that really cool difference between a very, very cool light in the purple and a very, very warm light in our key. So adding kind of an intriguing, interesting looking look to our recording studio there. Okay. Then on the inverse of that, we then had our drumming scene. Okay. This one was a lot of fun. It was very loud, but it was a lot of fun. So for this, we actually flew the 1x1 Gemini overhead. We kept it in the snap bag. We did not have any diffusion on it, but we wanted this light to feel very directional, very sourcey, and very bright. So this scene in particular, we had the 1x1 set up at 100% directly overhead. The key light was probably 4.5, maybe 5 feet away from our drummer. So very, very close, very, very bright, very, very intense. We have one practical kind of in the background, which we use as justification for the color temperature. We're not really using the lamp in the background as motivation for our light as much as context for our location. And then in the last shot, you can see in the adjacent room, we left that purple tube light back in there, which again just kind of ties into that scene from before, which takes two different locations and kind of makes them feel a little bit more contextualized together. Okay, so again, all of this, two lights, we're on rollies, we're moving very, very, very quickly through each of these scenes. Okay. We then cut on action, which then takes us into our library. The library transition that we have here was super, super simple. There were huge skylights overhead naturally in the library. It's a very, very tall building, has very naturally diffused light. So for this, again, color read on the natural light coming in from the skylight, matching that with the 1x1 hard. And all we're doing with the 1x1 hard is we're giving context to our drums. So you can see that on some of the toms, we're getting some of that light wrap that we're seeing on those so that they don't fall into blackness. And then of course, giving a little bit more illumination on our foreground so they're not too dim when compared to the background. Okay. So again, really leaning on available light of what we have there, but not just leaning on available light. We are still supplementing that light with the 1x1 hard. Okay. So that's what we've got going on there. And then juxtaposing that, we then have the rest of the library, where in this case we have the librarian. So again, another tight space like what we were in the server room, which is a really, really tight lane. The nice thing with these tube lights and with these panel lights is they are extremely lightweight. So not only can we run them off of battery power, we can also fly them really high and really far without needing things like heavy combos or menace arms or other kind of rigging to get them where we want. So for this, we simply flew the Gemini 1x1 up and over the aisle on camera left, and then we had on camera right the tube doing the very same thing. So you can see again, we're using our background environments in a way that helps sell our separation between our foreground, midground, background, right? Our subject is wearing a dark shawl, they have a dark wig, we have a very light background and a window behind them, okay? But you can tell that our key light is coming from above, right? Because we are taking that 1x1, we're flying it overhead, we're bringing that down, and then the fill is coming in, or the kind of behind fill is what's adding that dimension to our subject's hair on that camera left side, okay? So again, very fast, very clean, very quick setups as we're moving through this. But it just goes to show when you have the right tools for the job, You're able to do a lot in a very, very, very short period of time. Okay. This scene then leads into our cybersecurity lab here, which is the vehicle cybersecurity. We really wanted this to feel very, CIA, the way that you would feel like important places are in movies, Jason Bourne, that kind of stuff. So we turned all of the house lights off for this, right? Because it's, again, a very normal classroom environment here. We turned all of the lights off. We then took that 1x1 Gemini Hard, used HSI to get the exact blue hue that we wanted to it, put it on the far side of the room so that way it would kind of fill, but it would still be quite directional. We did not ceiling bounce this. We had it ceiling bounced initially, and then we changed it to be much more directional because we liked the way that it felt kind of hard and contrasty with a directional pointed light versus a ceiling bounce. And then for this, we have our key light being that tube light. And you can see here, this is why you would use the tube light on that 45, both in terms of your Z axis as well as your X and Y, because we have our subject turn their head toward camera and away from camera all in one shot, and we're able to still maintain that Rembrandt style lighting, right? We're able to still keep that key light on the shadow side cheek. We're still able to use that as a bit of a catch light in the eyes. Having that much larger surface area is a way that you can kind of cheat your way through a lot of different lighting setups where you might not necessarily have much larger rigging. Okay. Get to this. These flashes are all done with the Gemini 1x1 Hard. We've enhanced them a bit in post, but again, all of this is done, and these in particular were done using the effects that are built into this. We did a whole series on the effects of these lights, so that's also on Light Panel's YouTube channel if you want to check those out. But you can strobe flash this, and we did it manual control, so then that way we can put our talent in different poses and positions and get that natural strobe light. If we just added those strobes in post, you wouldn't get the same kind of wrap that you do of a natural light hitting the subject, because it's going to hit things at different times, it's going to hit them at different intensities, and it's going to hit them with different behaviors. So while we punched it in post, using a practical effect is a way of getting a much more organic feel to that lighting. And you can do that all directly within this feature, which is awesome, within this fixture, which is awesome. And then of course using the diffusion as kind of that hair from behind, again, super, super helpful. You can see we've got the practical whip out, which then leads to our practical whip in, which is the inverse shot here. Okay, so for this, again, super high contrast, but we put our talent in black and had them against a very brightly lit white background, right? So as you're thinking through your foregrounds, your midgrounds, and your backgrounds, and we're thinking of the contrast that we're creating in the way that we do our lighting, blocking, framing, composition, all of those directly affect how a shot feels just as much as the lighting does. So for this, we have our key light camera right, which is that 1x1 Hard. We just turned it around to be on our subject here, and then we're using that 1x1 or the tube light as our diffusion on the other side. But you can see here we're actually using that tripod. We're using the camera as a negative. We have it close enough to his face, and we have him positioned between the two lights to where you do have the fill on one side and the key on the other, but you do have this kind of dark band of contrast between those two. Again, creating shaping, creating that sense of contrast and context without needing a bunch of different fixtures to do so. David asks, any tips on how to stop that precisely while doing a whip pan? Yeah, two things. One, make sure that you have a really good DP. That's step one. Step two, you can also do a little bit of adjusting in post. Okay, so for this, we use the Sockler tripod heads. We use the Active 10 head. We had it on Flowtech sticks. Sockler, awesome. But for that, you can actually adjust the tension with a pretty extreme sense of specificity. So that way you can get as fast or as slow of a whip as you want. But really, when it comes to a hard stop, it's the operator, right? So I know some ops will create a physical barrier or a hard stop to where the arm off of the back of the tripod or off of, yeah, will actually hit a physical thing. In this case, our DP just whipped and held as best they could. And then I went through in post and just once we got to our stationary place, I stabilized the shot there. So there'd be no further movement. So that way it feels very much like a hard lock stop. But yeah, that was all an in-camera whip that then we just locked it off a little bit more tightly in post. I should make a video on what I call 1020 warp. It's how to use warp stabilizer in Premiere in a way that doesn't make it look like you have vertigo. It's a really, really beneficial way, especially for stuff like this, where we just need to take a little bit of the float out. It's a cool thing to do. So I might put that up on YouTube or make a reel or a TikTok about that. But yeah, so anyway, there you go. The next scene we have is this, again, large scene, big scene, but an important one. So for this, you can see if you look up to camera left, there's that kind of bright section of ceiling. There's a big skylight up there. So we're using that as our source where we are then going to motivate. So we then key from that same side, which is again, that 1x1 Gemini hard. For that, we did put the diffusion on it because we had a natural sense of light coming from that we didn't want to make it too hard because the light coming from the skylight was already diffused. Opposite that is where we put the tube lights. And again, really, really soft. Most of the time when you are working on creating a hair light or a cut light, edge light, rim light, crown light, backlight, whatever you want to call it, you want it to just be bright enough to be useful without being noticeable. So if you look at the far side on camera right of our subject's face, if you look on the right side of the stock exchange bell, you can see that we're getting a little bit of push from the tubes, but not so much that it's drawing attention to itself because we don't have a natural source coming from that side. We're simply using it as fill-in separation. Okay. Okay, then we get to the outside scenes, which we used at the beginning and the end. And for this, of course, we're outside. So we do have the natural sun coming from the normal kind of sun direction, where in this case, it is kind of up and on the camera left. One of the things, and I cannot stress this enough, when you are filming outside, unless you are filming an extreme wide shot where everybody's this small in the frame, just because you're outside doesn't mean we use only available light. Natural light is very different from available light. Available light is we just show up, it's the light that God made, there we are, we're moving on, right? Natural light is an aesthetic, is a lighting style that looks normal, looks natural, but it is very, very much enhanced. So when we come in here and we're looking at this, even though we're outside, we've used that 5-in-1, and I have a PA Hollywooding that 5-in-1 between the sun and our subject. And the reason why you do that is even if it's not on a super, super sunny day, you do that because it will even out any inconsistencies. So if you're shooting under trees, if you're shooting in partially shaded environments, if you're shooting in direct sunlight, right, having that evenness on your subject is going to maintain the direction of your key, but alter the behavior of your key to make sure that your talent looks as good as they possibly can. Okay, so our key light in this case is overhead, it is the sun, but we are still diffusing that through there. Now, if you look at the camera right side of our subject's hair, right, you see how bright that is. Because our subject's hair is the same color as the background, even though I've put them in light colored clothing, we were really losing the side of their head into that background. So to create that sense of separation that we need between our foreground, midground, and background, we wheeled in the 1x1, we wheeled it in with the snap bag on it, we took the diffusion off. And we wheeled it in to get it into a position where it would illuminate the backside of the right side of his head. You see it kind of creep over the shoulder. If you look at kind of the backpack strap on camera right, you'll see that there's light wrap kind of over the shoulder there too. And if you look there at the very bottom of the frame, you'll see that there's actually the corner of the snap bag in the frame, right? We wheeled it in to get it to the position and the point that we wanted it to be in. It actually had to be in frame. Now, it wasn't blocking any of my talent's delivery. It wasn't blocking any of their, movements or blocking. So having it in frame isn't the worst thing in the world. All you have to do is you have to make sure that you get a clean plate after the fact. So what we did is we had our talent stand there, deliver their lines to camera. We had the light in our shot, and all we then did is we had the talent move out and we wheeled the light out, and we made sure we got about 15 to 20 seconds of a blank slate where there's no foreground element, there's no light in the frame. And then it's really easy to just make a garbage mat after the fact, and anywhere that light fixture is visible, you just mat it out, have your plate underneath, and nobody would ever know that was actually there. So to get the position we wanted, it had to be in frame. But by getting it in frame and shooting a plate, we were then able to get the lighting that we wanted without, of course, seeing the fixture in our frame. Aaron says, how often did you have to adjust your setups to avoid light reflections? I fight this all the time, trying to find the right placement and angles of lights. 1000%, right? This is why shooting anywhere where there's glass, anywhere where there's mirrors, anywhere that there's reflective surfaces becomes quite a challenge. There's a couple of ways that you can combat that. The first thing that you can do to combat that is elevating lights. Bringing lights up is one of the easiest ways to get them out of your direct view. In order to do that, though, you need to make sure that the lights that you're using can produce enough light that you can still get the behavior, the position, and the placement of those lights where you want them to be. Moving up is always, always, always step one. Depending on the type of lighting style that you're going for, indirect lighting is also very, very helpful, right? So taking the lights, pointing them away, and using other surfaces, whether they're bounces, 5-in-1s, corner, ceiling, whatever, getting that light positioned away from your talent is then going to help it not seem as sourcey, right? Or seem as we have a very directional kind of point. Another thing that we do oftentimes is that in the blocking and the composition and the framing, I position my light in a way where there will be an element that will be able to block that reflection from us. So whether it's a foreground element, whether it is background talent, whether that's, of course, in front or behind our subject, extras, right, is another thing that we call them. But using the blocking to help hide those reflections is super helpful. So move your lights up, indirect lighting, and then of course blocking and composition are three ways that we can kind of get around it. This is also why we talk about lighting spaces and not faces, because the more you can back your lights up and the more that we can kind of light an entire set instead of just an individual place, we don't have to worry about it quite as much as we're going through. The last thing, if you're finding a lot of reflections, use a polarizer. A polarizer filter is going to be hands down your best friend. Something to note when using a polarizer filter is that you are going to lose, depending on the filter, probably about a stop to a stop and a half of light. It's the side effect of using a polarizer. But a polarizing filter or a polarizer filter's sole purpose is to eliminate glares and reflections. So it's a two-part filter where you can adjust one side against the other side, and depending on that position will depend on what glare that it's cutting out. But if you need to cut through water, if you need to cut through glass, if you need to cut through mirrors, if you need to cut through things to eliminate any of those reflections, even if you're shooting indoors, polarizing filters or polarizers are going to hands down be your best friend. Even if you're shooting outside, right, and the sky is blown out for your composition, a polarizer filter can bring a lot of that contrast back in from your sky. So if you're a DP, a camera op, that kind of thing, hands down the filters you need to have neutral density, without a doubt. You need to have some form of IR or infrared protection, especially because we're shooting on digital sensors. You can get a lot of neutral density that has an IR filter built in now. It's called IRND, obviously. But IR, ND, and polarizers, that is hands down the key starting point to any camera op or DP's filter kit. From there, you can get artistic and stuff, but with starting out, Those are musts. Steve said, getting a clean plate outdoors is risky because light can change so quickly. Two very good points that you bring up here. Whenever you're going to get a clean plate, the thing that is most important to do is to make sure that you're getting that plate as close to the time of recording your subject as possible for exactly what Steve is talking about. So for us, we got our clean plate on a roll, which means that we didn't cut the camera. We didn't stop rolling, right? We had our talent deliver their lines. When I was happy with the delivery, we immediately flew out the light and the talent and got our 10 to 15 second plate. If you wait, obviously not only can light behavior change, but the position of the light changes as the sun moves through the sky, as does the color temperature of light. So making sure that you're getting your plates as close to time of recording as humanly possible is crucial, right? And if you are going to get your plate on a roll, make sure that you backslate your clip, right? So that way you do have, even if you front slated it, backslate it for your plate, so that way your editor knows kind of where to pull from. If you're unfamiliar with that, front slating and back slating, right? Obviously we have our AC, which is going to then mark the take. If you forget to mark a take at the top, you then would do what's called backslating, which is you mark it at the end. If you backslate, you just take the slate, flip it upside down, and mark with the slate upside down. If you're going to shoot a plate on a roll, front slate and back slate. Front slate for the take and back slate for the plate. But yes, Steve, you're absolutely right. If you're shooting with a camera that doesn't shoot RAW, also make sure that you're getting a color read probably every 20 to 30 minutes, because the sun does change color temperature throughout the day. And if you just take a color read and you white balance in the morning, by the time you get to noon, your footage is going to be very tough to use. And by the time you get to the evening, your footage is going to be impossible to use. So if you're not shooting in RAW, adjust your white balance every 20 to 30 minutes if you're shooting outside, to make sure that you're keeping your lighting as natural as possible. Okay. Somehow, miraculously, we made it through all of those scenes. So that is awesome. But that is how we went through and we shot on remote power. So no mains, everything was super, super run and gun. Because everything was on battery power, from the camera to the monitors to the lights, we were able to move as quickly as we needed. So a very small crew of 5 people could film 16 different setups and location changes and costume changes with 44 background extras within 2 days. Okay, so if you guys have any more questions, we've run out of time, but if you have any more questions, Michael, yes, we'll replay it right here at the end. If you have any more questions throughout, the coming days and weeks and things, or if you have projects and stuff that are coming up that you want some thoughts and opinions and things on, follow me on Instagram. I'm super active on Instagram. Excuse me. Follow me there. I'm active there. So if things pop up, there you go. To close out, we're going to watch the ad one more time. Now that you kind of know exactly where all of that stuff is, link to all of that is there. Make sure you follow Light Panels on all of their social as well. So thank you all. Oh, real quick thing here before we play the ad one more time. Next live stream is in August. We're talking about exposure. How to get exposure, how to maintain exposure, how to use exposure artistically. How can we confidently underexpose or overexpose for narrative reasons? So we're going to be talking about the cinematic use of exposure and how we can use that artistically to tell those stories. So make sure that you register for that because that's going to be held in August. And to wrap this up and close this out, we will play the ad one more time. Thanks, everyone. Wait for it. Let's get it to play.
Everyone knows online classes at Washtenaw Community College are fantastic. Just wait till you see the cutting-edge facilities that are only available on campus. This isn't business as usual. Business today is whatever you want it to be. From creating sleek web designs and apps to innovative programming, WCC fuels my passion. I can crack the code to success in IT and networking. And WCC offers more than just bytes and bottom lines, like developing my skills in photography. Or turn your ideas into eye-catching visuals as a graphic designer. Perhaps I'll find my rhythm in audio engineering. The opportunities at WCC are limitless. From safeguarding connected vehicles to creating mind-blowing 3D animations. No matter your dream, we have the tools to bring it to life. Because today's business world is as diverse as our interests. Discover the hands-on education that awaits you in the Business and Computer Technologies division. You have to be here to believe it.
Thank you all. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks to Light Panels for hosting this. And all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening. Good night.